Today. We're gathered here to learn all about green infrastructure. And the first part of our meeting is going to be three panelists who are going to talk about green infrastructure in different ways. So first up, we're going to have Stacy Erickson, who's going to be talking about the green infrastructure for resilient communities. We've been kind of thinking about this as green infrastructure 101. What do we mean by green infrastructure, and what does that look like on the landscape? Then Dr. Andrew Earls is going to talk about a specific case study in Parker and some of the innovative approaches and concepts they took with that project. And then after that, we have Carl from this City of Denver's Division of Green Infrastructure, and he's going to be talking about the way City of Denver approaches green infrastructure and what their programs and overall concepts look like. So we'll get three different perspectives, starting with Stacy. But then after that, we'll do some just panel Q&A and discussion. Love to hear if anyone else has any other green infrastructure projects that you're considering either implementing or working on, and if there's any support or things you need for that. But after that Q&A session, we'll do a walk around tour of this community here because when this community was being designed, green infrastructure was a big component of the design. And so Stacy and Jim here are going to be talking about, we're going to walk around and look at the different green infrastructure components, talking about both the process that was put into place to identify those green infrastructure opportunities and then what it actually looks like in practice. So really excited for getting outside and walking around. So you won't need to go into your car and drive it around unless you need to find a new parking spot. Otherwise, we'll just be walking from here and looking at things. So that's our agenda for the day. Anyone with any questions, comments before we jump into it? All right. Just to let everyone know, we are recording this just so we can share the presentations with the larger partnership later. So with that, I'm going to invite Stacy to give our first presentation on Green Infrastructure 101. Stacy?
I think I'm going to sit so that I don't block the photos in the presentation here. When I first started off working in green infrastructure, there wasn't a lot of stuff about semi-arid green infrastructure. So I created a website with a really wonderful intern who did the bulk of the work to put it all together. There really wasn't a lot out there at that point in time. Car Association Floodplain Managers has something, but it was hard to find. Thankfully, EPA shows up much quicker in Google than some other things. I also was really focused on trying to have some pictures that showed a lot of detail. So go around and take a lot of photos. So the photo that you see up here on this intro slide is actually EPA's green roof. I think this was taken at a point when it was in really good shape and it looked really nice, and there have been challenges over the years. Communities face a lot of challenges with trash and stormwater pollutants, excess volume that causes flooding and erosion of our stream banks, and then drought conditions, particularly where we live out west. And development increases a lot of impervious cover, and that can impact downstream water quality. Basically, this graph shows that after you get over about 25% impervious cover, which obviously cities have a lot of impervious cover, you start getting degraded streams of water quality. There's a great photo there that shows what happens when you get a lot of excess volume, velocity, and you erode the stream banks. But the traditional way of managing stormwater is to quickly move the stormwater off-site to a water body or detention ponds. I think when we actually had a stormwater design charrette for this community, originally where this building is right here was going to be, when the RTD owned it, this piece of property, it was going to be a stormwater detention pond. And then Mayor Hickenlooper wanted to do something different to activate the light rail station. The city bought the property and worked with DHA. And in discussions with the RTD engineers, they said, there were a lot of discussions about, we just try to move it offsite, or we try to create a detention pond. And so they really tried to look at how to create more distributed green infrastructure too, and to marry the green infrastructure with the gray infrastructure. Using low impact development or green infrastructure is looking at stormwater as a resource, trying to manage as much of that water on site as you can. and reducing pollutant loads to water bodies and trying to create multifunctional infrastructure. Infrastructure is really expensive. So, if you want to try to make it multi-purpose. Low impact development used to be the preferred term that EPA used. We've now moved to green infrastructure. I think the last administration, it was more nature-based solutions. The terminology, there's a lot of green infrastructure, there's a lot of different terminology. But it's basically looking at comprehensive land planning and basically trying to enhance the hydrologic regime and trying to sustain or restore ecological functions. It's more sustainable. It can be applied to redevelopment or as retrofits. It's cheaper to do it up front than to do retrofits later. And it's basically a different way to look at stormwater. And the photo you see there is actually behind, this is the Northfield Shopping Center. This is behind the Super Target and the Bass Pro Shop. And it takes stormwater from the parking lots there and also from Interstate 70. And it's actually really beautiful. There's some benches out there. I've seen coyotes there. There's a lot of hawks and stuff that come over from the arsenal in the area. It's actually nice, and it doesn't look like typical stormwater retention. Green infrastructure are systems that mimic the hydrologic cycle and basically take stormwater and slow it down and spread it out and soak it in. And it can be used on a lot of different scales. So you can do it in parks and open space and urban forestry, parking lot landscaping, climate adaptation strategies. It's part of smart growth strategies and things like green streets. It can be done in flood restoration and then also preservation of natural landscapes like forests and floodplains and wetlands. And the top photo there is Westerly Creek. This is half a block from my house in Stapleton Central Park. That was after a particularly large storm event. It functioned really well. This was a stream that was under runways and taxiways and has been daylighted in the redevelopment. And it's a really great place to walk. And then the photo at the bottom is actually Western Resource Advocates, up in Boulder. You can see that there's some curb cuts there that channel the stormwater into the parking lot landscaping. A lot of different types of green infrastructure, green roofs, planter boxes, rain gardens, bioswales or bioretention cells. A lot of this stuff is like overlap. They use different terminology. Vegetated swales and tree trenches, ponds, porous pavements, green streets or complete streets, wetlands, riparian areas, and rainwater harvesting. And the top photo there is actually the Mormon Church. It's a convention center in Salt Lake City, and it's a green roof there. And the bottom one is actually Fort Carson, Colorado, and those are some bioswales. Green infrastructure has multiple benefits: environmental, social, and economic. It's really a systems thinking approach, and it's going to have a bigger impact when it's holistically integrated with other infrastructure or stacked with other projects. And it's the most cost-effective way to do things. The photo you see there is up in Fort Collins. There's some permeable pavements on the parking lot, and you've got some swales there with some actually nice flowers and vegetation. A few things in the design that didn't work out right on that particular project. The water didn't channel real well into the swale off of the parking lot, but those are part of the lessons learned. In Denver, we don't have a lot of precipitation. We have a lot of sunshine. We have infrequent intense storms. And it's important to use low water native plants. And sometimes it doesn't always look green. Sometimes, as Sarah Anderson said, it looks like taupe infrastructure. And the photo you see there is actually in Wyoming. It's a sod roof in Jackson Hole. This photo used to be the Museum of Contemporary Art, and sort of says green infrastructure is art. But things are a little different here. We don't have combined sewer overflows here. which is how EPA has been able to compel other parts of the country to install green infrastructure. Somebody else owns the water in prior appropriation. We have a lot of clay soils. It's really important to design and engineer for infiltration. Site-specific design and installation are really important. Having experienced installers is important. Irrigation's needed to get plants established, which brings up the cost somewhat. And then choosing the plants is really important. These are just some Western regional websites and tools, and that's a resource for you later. These are some photos of down along the South Platte River, and looking at some permeable pavements and some green infrastructure. Soil, there's a number of challenges: poor soil, clay soils, contaminated brownfield soils. In urban areas, soils get very compacted. Infiltration is challenging. And then in cold weather, you get freeze thaw. You have issues with plants. You may have issues with road salt, which impacts your plant selection. So those are some of the challenges that people who design green infrastructure have to look at. And the photo you see here is actually the Sun Valley neighborhood, which is Denver Housing Authority's redevelopment that they're working on currently. There's a lot of barriers. There was a really great report that was done, I think by the city of Boulder. But there's a lot of things about, perceived design and construction and maintenance costs. Different government agencies that maybe don't completely work as well together, and misperception on economics, not having integrated planning, people not trusting new things. That's shifting a lot now. Then the irrigation issues again. And the top photo is Central Park. This runs along between 29th Avenue. There's some running paths and some nice green infrastructure. And then the bottom photo is Odell Brewery in Fort Collins. I've been back up there trying to get a better picture, but every time I go up, it's not raining and there are way too many cars to get a great photo. But the vegetation looks way better now.
You're just using it as an excuse to keep going to Odell Brewery, so.
Plant selection is key. Climate, soil type, permeability, plants. Kentucky bluegrass is not preferable due to the amount of water it needs, shallow roots, and pesticides and herbicides. And using salt tolerant plants like near roads can be important. Conifer trees don't deal well with that. And that photo is Westerly Creek again. A lot of operations and maintenance considerations. I think when we go out on the tour, you'll see that there's some things that have failed. It looks like they probably didn't maintain them really well. But needing to look at infiltration and drainage, pruning and mowing, mulching, watering and fertilizing, getting rid of dead plants, looking at inlets and outlets and under drains, a lot of different upkeep, and it's all at different frequencies. And the photo you see there is Greenway Park in Central Park, Stapleton. Some of the neighbors there don't actually like this. It's really beautiful. There's a lot of people that don't like the dense vegetation. They're afraid of snakes, which is interesting hearing people talk about that. These are some photos along Brighton Boulevard. You've got some planter boxes here. I don't know, Carl, if those benches that have the rocks in it were designed to be gabions or not, but they look like it.
Yes, they were. I actually worked for Stantec at the time. Those the grades and everything. Yeah, it was just kind of bring the feel of the river. It's like the river rock and blend that into the streetscape a little bit.
Okay. This is a green alley on one side, and some more planter boxes on the other side. Some more photos in Fort Collins. You can see some really great vegetation. You can see some of the overflow areas in case there's a really big storm event. This is CSU in Fort Collins. The permeable pavements are basically approaching the student center. The last time I was up there and got a demo, they were functioning really well. They absorbed a lot of water. And then you can see on the other side, this is an area in between some buildings. They have kind of a dry creek bed, a bunch of vegetation and some overflow areas. This is CU Boulder. I believe this was outside one of the dorms. You've got some roof runoff that's channeled into the dry creek bed. I actually did that on a house that I had in Thornton, where we put a dry creek bed that took the stormwater from the downspouts, and it functioned really good. Unfortunately, the people that bought my house, like, ripped it all out. So, this is Metro State University, some of their new infrastructure. A lot of the universities are really doing a great job. This is in Laramie, and this is a green roof, early stages. That was another one I didn't get up there to get it, more plant vegetation. But this is the Berry Biodiversity Center. And just a little bit about green infrastructure and equity and community design. A lot of EJ neighborhoods, and I can still say this because I don't work for EQ anymore, don't have as much green infrastructure or as much infrastructure as other areas. And sometimes they can be in floodplains, not have as many trees. And so they have a lot more impacts. And so, and there's some really great projects where if you, like stormwater design shifts that were done here, and some of the building design charrettes that DHA did that were really amazing examples of community involvement. So this is what South Lincoln homes look like before and after. They had some old 1940s buildings. This is actually, that's actually Tim Rader. That was actually from the energy design charrette. But we had energy, transportation, and green infrastructure design charrettes, and some really great experts to help with some of the discussion about stormwater. DHA won a EPA Smart Growth Achievement Award for the redevelopment here back in 2012. Here's some photos. I have to say, some of this, when I walked around today, doesn't look like this anymore, unfortunately, but there's still some good spots left. That there's a few that look like they're going to have some new plants put in. This is a project in Westerly Creek, in an area with a lot of affordable housing. It's called New Freedom Park. It was a project with the Trust for Public Land in the city of Denver, and Wank and Associates. We did some community work there, and you can see what it was like before, and you can see the after pictures. It turned out really beautiful. And we had lots of fun with kids. Wade Shelton from Trust for Public Lands talked about vacant lots being liabilities, but turned into an asset. Donnie Roush, who used to work with Earth Force and then for the city of Denver, and who's now with the Colorado Watershed Assembly, did a kids design subgroup. And they played in it. They were the best. They were the best people in the group talking about what they wanted. This is Weir Gulch in Sun Valley. It was really great when they got rid of the trapezoidal concrete channel. Before they even got any of the vegetation in, there were deer in there. There was a turtle. There was crawdads, and it made it safer and much more beautiful. It was kind of dangerous at one point. Sun Valley is got an eco district, using a lot of green infrastructure over there to improve water quality along the South Platte. Again, the old stuff and the new design. EPA Brownfields program did a green infrastructure option study for Sun Valley. CH2M Hill actually did the design, did the work on that. And basically it showed that green infrastructure, they looked at upfront capital costs and also 20-year maintenance costs, and that green infrastructure in the 4 options was only marginally more than conventional infrastructure. And actually, when you looked at it over 20-year maintenance costs, it actually ended up being cheaper. This is Johnson Habitat Park, also along the South Platte River, and some work that the EPA helped fund. DHM did that work. This was a project for Urban Land Conservancy at the Blake Street light rail station. They didn't end up implementing this full project. They were hoping to get a bigger parcel, buy 2 other parcels. And so they didn't get to actually implement the designs. It was a lot of fun. We had it at Colorado Housing Conference, and it was a really great design for that. So trying to re-envision it. The designs actually, if they had been able to implement this, would have been able to actually infiltrate 100% of the storm event. I can't remember which storm event offside. There were a bunch of toolbox examples from that project. This is just sort of showing the engineering piece. Really important to design for infiltration, and you do stuff on site to make sure that it doesn't fail. This is a project on Morrison Road at an old service station. Trying to create a plaza as a catalyst, and then trying to do some street calming and putting in a lot of green infrastructure. Big shout out to EPA's Land Revitalization Technical Assistance Program, which they're still doing. This is a project in Glowman Springs at a former wastewater treatment plant for a regional park at the confluence of 2 rivers. This is a project in Canyon City at an area where there is a winery and a former convent and areas, and trying to incorporate a lot of different area and taking their existing stormwater pond, doing some things to try to create more of a regional area. And then just a plug for the SPRUWP Natural Capital Resource Assessment, which was a green infrastructure mapping project that SPRUWP did a few years ago. And just important to listen to a community about what they want, consider maintenance, designing things for success, and doing a conceptual design at the beginning will help get the community on board, makes it easier to find funding later. And really important, I found the projects that turned out the best, there were landscape architects and engineers together, not one or the other. That's also for Collins there on. Just a few EPA tools. The WaterSense program fits well with green infrastructure. Stormwater Smart, which is some really nice stormwater outreach stuff that people can take and put their own logos and things on. It came out a couple years ago. Some great modeling tools, including a couple that were created by one by Colorado State University and one by Colorado School of Mines, which are on EPA's website. And a really great, this came out in 2022, disaster resilient design concepts. So it's a great resource from EPA. And I these are some national websites and tools. There was some really great work done under the last administration on nature-based solutions. There used to be something on the White House webpage. It's not there anymore. And I didn't get it into this presentation, but it is available. And I can send it to Sam later to go ahead and send it out to folks. There is a roadmap that's on Department of Interior's webpage. And then there's actually a resource list, some of which is probably changing in this administration, but what each federal agency offers in order support for nature-based solutions. And it's now actually on the National Archives website. So I did finally dig it up. They didn't make it completely disappear. So that's it for me.
Great, thanks, Stacey. In between time, we have, in between presentations, we have a little bit of time for if anyone has any questions. So anyone with any questions for Stacey on green infrastructure? Oh, go ahead.
So the alley, the green alley, forest pavers, that was done by, we didn't have to do it. We vacated the alley, lined the sanitary sewer line, so wastewater would have to get in there for maintenance. And we gave them an easement, and then all the dry utilities. But what's interesting about those pavers was he went to every paver manufacturer here in Denver, and they have all these pallets that they don't use, part this, part that, whatever. And we got them all and put them on another piece of property, just put them all there. And then the landscape architect came in and goes, I can make a pattern out of all these different colors. And everything. So things like that can be done. At very little cost. For creating that reality. The other thing that's interesting about Westwood Creek, and I believe you worked on it. I was the vice president of engineering and planning. There are water quality ponds within 100-year flood or Westwood Creek. And people go, because you have the flood and all the debris and everything, and sills go up and down. And if they're properly maintained and well laid out, that's another opportunity to use non-buildable land for water quality. But that Western Creek turned out basically well. And what she had was, I think it was 2013 maybe, when we had the big floods, up north and everything here. They had a 100-year storm up there. And now I know there's 1 foot of freeboard with a 100-year storm, because we took pictures and the water level was exactly 1 foot lower than the library along MLK. It's great, but those are some interesting things. For people that work in Denver, you're working on new specifications or
Kind of, yeah.
kind of.
Yeah.
And I'm sure this will come up, but the green infrastructure law that Denver has very in depth. Wilson Company's just been selected to reduce its size for developers and modify the specifications. But they have some great details, and it all comes down to details. You see the detail on Broadway, out by the stock show and everything. That's a great detail. I mean, it takes a lot of different things, but a couple of things that Stacy said that's important. Landscape architects and engineers working together. I'm actually in the book. One of the projects I did is an ugly pond that's the one over at Pepsi Centers, but the water quality ponds at Pepsi Center got some tickets. They didn't want to spend any money there. But maintenance is a huge deal. And the other thing, you can actually see when she started taking pictures from like 95 up to 212 and 214, how the evolution of the design has changed over time. So that's also a big deal to think about. But excellent presentation.
Thanks, Jim. And Jim has been involved in so many different things at Central Park Stapleton and here at Mariposa, and working with the city on overall stormwater design. So he's like a wealth of information. And I've learned so much from him over the years.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, absolutely.
From Stacy. Stacy, given your career at EPA, you've been doing this for a long time now, and
Since 2009.
there you go. That's a good long tenure in terms of how things happen here. And I think that was around when we did that lid barrier study for Keep It Clean Partners. And originally, some of the biggest barriers were that people didn't understand it. It's not required by regulations. My question is, have you seen the barriers change over the years that you've been working on this? Or there's some that are maybe not as big of a barriers now, some that are maybe bigger barriers now? Just interested in your thoughts on that over the past 15 plus years or so.
It's definitely changed. At the beginning, you talk to people, particularly, a lot of engineers that, and it's complicated because the way cities have their money set up, and I spent 4 years on loan to the city of Denver, and there were major disagreements with the folks in the transportation, and under the Department of Public Works and the Parks Department, because they were using parks as some of their green in order to manage stormwater, and stormwater sometimes brings trash and other things with it, and the parks people were just angry. They were really upset with the other folks about it, but they were able to work things out over time when they got some money. out of the Stormwater Enterprise Fund in order to help with some of the maintenance, and they've got some amazing designs of things that they've done recently, like at City Park and other areas where you see the different pieces come together. I think, you know, a lot of people just said you couldn't do it out west. I went to like lots of public meetings where people would say, well, we're not Seattle. And so, you know, that's, you know, part of what I was trying to do with some of the photos on our website, saying you can do it here. It is slightly more complicated. I got lots of people say, why don't you make developers or the city like do things? And like, cause we see it in other places, like in Philadelphia or something. And you're like, well, we don't have an enforcement action because we don't have combined sewer overflows, and so we can't actually compel it. So really, we worked a lot more on trying to do outreach. You know, irrigation is just a challenge that you have to deal with in this climate, which adds to the cost. I think, you know, operations and maintenance is still a challenge. But I think as you've seen, you know, people move, you know, younger people being hired, in different places who learned different sorts of things in school. You know, in engineering school, there's been a huge transition in people saying, no, you can, you know, really do this. And, you know, some of the things I like to, you know, my previous partner, I took him around like, you know, Stapleton, and yeah, I was pointing out things that are stormwater infrastructure. And he says, well, that's, you know, that's not stormwater infrastructure. And then I'd like take him out there and I show him, I said, Founders Green, for example, which is where they have concerts and they have the farmers market and stuff. It's Kentucky bluegrass, but it works well for the uses that it has. You can see the overflow in there. You can also see the parking lots right over by the library where they have signs that say that this is a detention facility and there may be a foot of water if there's a big storm event. But it's again integrating the pieces and making it not look like stormwater infrastructure, and then people don't even realize, you know, what it is. And I think that's changed, you know, a lot of people's minds about things.
That's great perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, I've learned a lot just putting together this workshop, and I think that has been my biggest takeaway so far, is like the green design can be everywhere and you just don't always notice it if you don't know what to look for, but it's there, which has been cool. Anyone else with any other questions? All right, not seeing any. Dr. Andrew Earls, you want to jump in with your presentation? And yep, and you should just be able to click and you'll be at yours. Don't worry, I'll keep you honest. Oh, it's if you click in present, you can just click. Yep, yep.
Oh, nice. Even better. Okay, sorry.
No worries.
Okay, well, first of all, everybody, thank you so much for having me here today. I appreciate the opportunity to come and visit with this group. I know some of you, but others I don't know. So I'm pleased to get to meet you today. I'm going to talk today about a project that we've been working on with the Mile High Flood District. Mueller Engineers, a guy named Jim Woolman, who some of you may know, has been a partner in a lot of this work. And this project, I think I first started working on this when this was just a raw piece of rangeland sometime around 2016. I was trying to remember this morning, like when it actually started. So this has been going on for about 8 years now. It's been a long study. But what I'm going to show you here today is how we have gone from the initial stages of planning all the way through a portion of this development that's been built using these concepts. And beyond that, we have plans. We're working with Colorado State University and Mile High Flood District to continue to monitor this development. So this is not over, it's continuing on. And I'm just kind of giving you an interim status report based on how we planned it, then how it was actually built, and then more to come in the future. But I really do want to give credit to Jim Woolman with Mueller and Barbara Chongtua with the Mile High Flood District. They've been involved with this as long as I have, and I've definitely borrowed a few of their slides today. So, but I let them borrow mine too. So well, what I wanted to do today was to talk just a little bit about watersheds and streams. And then I'll talk a little bit about the Oak Gulch case study. And then after I do that, I'll talk a little bit about the implementation of the project and how we went about that. To get started, let's talk about watersheds. And you know, we really saw it in this project to really understand how the development of a watershed relates to runoff, water quality, and the stream network, but also to understand how that happens through the typical governmental development process. And that's what you're seeing along the top here. The MP, that's master planning, that's usually a first step. We start by looking, at least in the metro area and some other areas that do this, at the whole watershed, and we kind of develop a plan for where we need to have different types of infrastructure. And then after we do that, we usually kind of come down a scale, and you get to the point where you're looking at portions of the watershed where maybe you have a large development coming in, or maybe you have a 500-acre solar farm. It could be a lot of different things. And, and then the process with which we go from that master plan through preliminary design to final design to building and operating the system, we have to be cognizant of how what we're doing relates to that process, because we have to work with the process if we want to get our green infrastructure ideas implemented. And if you wait until the roads are already laid out in development, it's too late. Which is why we really show this all starting at the runoff stage, or all starting at the master planning stage and continuing through all of these. It needs to be a consideration from the beginning, how we're going to manage water and water quality. So to talk a little bit about watersheds and streams, if you notice on this figure, kind of the main one there's some numbering. And there's little ones, twos, and threes, and fours. I don't know if everybody's familiar with that, but we often talk about stream order. And what we mean by stream order, it's just a classification system for how the dendritic patterns of streams fit together. And so the zero order streams are really even smaller than the ones that I've shown on here. Those could be just grass swales. The first order streams are tiny little streams, and they get bigger as you go downstream. And say, in our Oak Gulch watershed, we probably have maybe a third order stream. Maybe Oak Gulch is probably actually a fourth order stream. And these tiny little streams really, we like to call them the capillaries of the catchment, because they really do. They feed water to the stream. They're part of the watershed, and really preserving those has tremendous benefits. And if they can't be preserved, restoring them has huge benefits. So, there are a few places we can look in nature to see how this looks. And, nature's full of fractal patterns, and dendritic patterns are really a type of fractal pattern. If you think about the branches on a tree, or the roots on a tree, or the network of veins in a leaf, the blood vessels in your arm, for example. If somebody could somehow zap your arm and kill all the capillaries in your arm, what do you think would happen to your arm? Well, it'd fall off. And that's kind of like how the watershed works, right? I mean, if you destroy all the capillaries, the larger body's not going to work. And then when you look at the figure on the right, which is in the Amazon, you can really see that dendritic pattern. So, nature mimics itself at many different scales and has these fractal patterns. And we need to learn how to work with those types of patterns in the way that we do drainage and stormwater engineering, and I would say even flood control. So this is kind of the traditional model. And this is, Stacy, you showed something very similar to this. And this is kind of how we do master planning. In master plans, we're analyzing watersheds that are multiple square miles, sometimes tens or even hundreds of square miles. We don't break everything down to the smallest acre. We're usually analyzing things around 100 to 130 acres, figuring out where we need major drainage needs. However, if you take this 130-acre approach and just follow this, and you dump a detention basin in at the bottom of your 130 acres or a water quality basin, you are basically writing off everything upstream of that, right? I mean, everything upstream of that is going to experience developed flows. It's going to experience developed pollutant loads. Things downstream of your regional detention pond may do fine, but you're really destroying your watershed 100 to 130 acres at a time if you're doing this. The approach we really prefer, and we've been working to develop now for quite some time, and I think it's gaining traction, is really what we call this dendritic approach. And really, that's where we're really looking at having the detention distributed throughout the watershed. It's kind of what Stacy, I call it distributed detention, but it's really low impact development. And the reason I call it distributed detention is because it's not just focused on water quality. This has huge flood control benefits in addition, if you manage the streams in your watershed correctly. But what we really like to do is to preserve the green corridors. We distribute our water quality and detention throughout. We try to preserve natural streams where we can. Where we have to impact a natural stream, we can reconstruct a natural stream instead of putting it in a pipe. And we're really spreading the treatment out throughout the watershed to the benefit of all of the stream networks in the watershed. And this is kind of a scale we modeled, actually, I'll get into the modeling in a minute. You know, at one point, we actually modeled this down to like a scale. This is going crazy on me. This was showing you a 10 to 40 acres. We originally modeled it, which is kind of what we call like a neighborhood scale, which is really where you can implement LID very effectively. We also modeled it a lot block scale, which got down to like 1 to 5 acre subbasins. And we learned a lot from that about how LID functions and how much we should count on runoff reduction from these practices. But it's just really not practical to run models at that scale when you're analyzing larger watersheds. So at the end of the day, we kind of came back to that neighborhood scale as kind of a great place to really focus on the hydrologic modeling. And that's probably what I'm talking about more than anything today is our H&H modeling. That's kind of my area of expertise. There's obviously a lot more to this project than just H&H modeling now. So as I get going here, I wanted to explain kind of what our conceptual model for runoff is. And really, we define 4 types of areas. We define DCIA, that's directly connected impervious area. That's impervious area that drains onto other paved areas or directly into your stormwater system. So think of a parking lot draining to an area inlet. That parking lot would be entirely directly connected impervious area. Then we also have what we call SPA, that's separate pervious area. A separate pervious area is pervious area like raised medians where it'll treat the rainfall that falls directly on it, but it's not receiving runoff from anything else. Separate pervious area is beneficial, but it's even better if it can be receiving pervious area to help manage some of the runoff from impervious areas. And in many urban areas, looking at how you can convert separate pervious areas to receiving pervious areas is a real good thing to do for low impact development. So then on the other side of it, the equation, we have what we call unconnected impervious area or UIA. And by definition, unconnected impervious area is impervious area that drains to a receiving pervious area or an RPA. And that gives that impervious area an opportunity to infiltrate into the ground. The vegetation slows down the velocity. Those things all have big benefits. And a conventional system like curb and gutter with inlets, that's pretty much just DCI and SPA. Whereas if we were to go all out and do everything we could for green infrastructure, we could really be looking at the figure more so on the right. But in reality, any urban watershed, any watershed for that matter with development, and it's going to be a combination of these 2 things. And so the way we represent that in a model, and I'm going to geek out on y'all, people, if I get too deep in the model, just kind of wait till the next slide. But this is really our conceptual model that we use, and we use the EPA stormwater management model for a lot of this. It's not the only model you can use to do it, but it's one of the best ones because it gives us a lot of flexibility for figuring out whether impervious area drains to receiving pervious area or not. And so you can see the physical layout on the left really kind of breaks a watershed into the UIA, DCA, RPA, and SPA that I was just talking about, right? And the UIA drains through the RPA before going to the outlet. The DCA and the separate pervious area all drain to the outlet. Okay, when we represent that in SWIM though, what we actually have to do is break it down into paired watersheds. And the reason I say that is because the way SWIM works is you can tell SWIM to take a certain amount of impervious area that you have and direct it to a receiving pervious area. But in the SWIM model, it assumes that all of that pervious area in your catchment is receiving pervious area. And as I like to tell people, if it doesn't get wet, it's not receiving pervious area. So you kind of have to split it out and you have to do a little more of an effort to figure out what's disconnected and what's connected. And then you basically, instead of just doing one model catchment, you do actually this representation I'm showing you on the right-hand side. And you can very accurately then represent effects of disconnection of impervious area and also treatment measures like extended detention basins or grass buffers or bioretention areas, you name it. We can represent it using this methodology in SWIM, which is really convenient. This is kind of how we translated it into the modeling that we did. It's kind of the same thing I showed you before with more colors. But the one thing I would say is there are a couple things that we added in here that were in addition to just that cover land use model. Number one is we did consider site level BMPs, disconnection of impervious area that leads to infiltration. We built in some distributed full spectrum detention in areas. We figured out a way to account for irrigation that might happen on developed areas, which was actually just not that complicated to deal with. We account in continuous simulation modeling for evaporation and evapotranspiration. Another really important thing is when you preserve those small, low order channels, those things in some watersheds are fantastic for infiltration. You know, in other watersheds, maybe you have a high water table, they may not provide as much. They still provide benefits for slowing down runoff there. But this watershed down in Parker is mostly an upland area. You know, there might be a shallow groundwater table once people start watering their lawns, but there sure isn't right now. And these are sandy channels. They'll infiltrate a lot of runoff if we keep them. And you know, a 5 or 6 or 10-foot channel may not sound like a lot, but when you add that up over a whole watershed that's square miles, that is a lot of area for infiltration. Now, we don't typically account for that in flood control analysis, but it's the kind of thing that I think we should be accounting for more and more in green infrastructure analysis, because it has tremendous benefits. And then one of the things we did model in here that may be saying, well, why did you do this? Shallow groundwater. You know, we didn't explicitly model groundwater, but when you're running a continuous simulation in SWIM, you have to have a way for the plants to have water to evapotranspire. So you create basically an aquifer that underlies it. You account for how much water infiltrates, how much water the plants take back up, and then how much water goes deeper into the ground. So we did both event-based and continuous-based modeling. You'll see I call this the West Strogate Gulch case study. I maybe kind of gave you all a little bit of bait and switch by calling it Oak Gulch, but West Strogate Gulch is a tributary to Oak Gulch, and we just picked off something that was of a scale that we could manage and really analyze in a lot of detail. Also, West Strogate Gulch, this is an area that was one of the first areas set to develop. Now, just to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about, where we're talking about, this is Rieger Hess Reservoir up here. So this is down in Parker. This is actually right down through here. This is Cherry Creek coming down through there. So this is a right bank tributary to Cherry Creek. And so if we consider the traditional development approach for this watershed, we put a big regional detention basin at the bottom of it. We would have about 1 mile upstream that would be an engineered stream. We could bioengineer it to make it nice, but we have about 6 miles of storm sewer. You know, if we did this the conventional way, just to drain it. And, you know, when you consider the speed with which water moves through a concrete pipe or a corrugated metal pipe versus the speed that it moves through dense vegetation when it's shallow flow, it makes a huge difference on the residence time of the water in those conveyances. And right, if we're thinking of these conveyances as being able to infiltrate water, the longer the residence time, the more infiltration we get. So slowing down water benefits infiltration as well as benefiting reductions in peak flows downstream. So this is kind of more of a dendritic approach. It's kind of dipping our toe in the water by preserving, you know, basically here it would be, you know, some of the lower order tributaries, but maybe not all of them, and re-engineering some of the streams. And in this case, you know, we're looking at maybe 4 miles of stream. So we've gone from 1 mile to 4 mile. And look, we've cut the number of miles of storm sewer in half too, which is a real accomplishment in terms of being able to manage the stormwater in a more holistic way and to promote infiltration. So what we did for the hydrologic analysis, and part of this was not just to engineer a system for this development. We did this for Mile High to figure out what are the methods we should be using, how should we be applying these things, and what type of guidance can we provide to other people? Because most engineers in this area are pretty familiar with just standard modeling using Colorado Urban Hydrograph Procedure and SWIM. But as soon as you start talking about disconnecting impervious area or permeable conveyances or continuous simulation, people just don't know what they're doing. And it's understandable because you don't necessarily learn that in engineering school unless you take a lot of advanced classes. But one of the things I wanted to look at is to say, listen, in master plans, we typically model things and have for the past 30 years at a scale of maybe 100 to 130 acres for each set catchment. Is that correct? And part of the answer I think you'll see is no, it's not. This is kind of illustration that I'm depicting here is what we call our A scale. So we had 3 scales, A, B, and C. The A scale was kind of traditional 100 to 130 acre basins. The B scale, which I'll show you next, was the neighborhood scale, kind of 10 to 40 acres. And the C scale was the 1 to 5 acres. And for each of those, we evaluated traditional development and we evaluated the dendritic development. Now at the A scale, there's really not much to evaluate for the dendritic development because you paved over all of the lower order streams. It's not dendritic. It's got a pond at the bottom and it has a channel going to the pond. And here, you know, one metric we can look at is what is the stream density? So for this traditional development, we would have about 1.1 mile per square miles. That's how many miles of stream we have per square mile of watershed area. So keep that in mind as we go to the next slide. Next slide is the dendritic approach. This is what we call the B scale. And this is I think it should say 10 to 40. This is, I probably pulled out an older slide when we were developing this 20 to 60. But that had much smaller subcatchments. This is where we were able to start representing distributed full spectrum detention. Actually, we could represent distributed full spectrum detention well at this level. We also were able to represent some permeable conveyances. And look what happens to our stream density. We're at about nearly 4 miles of stream per square mile. That's 4 times as much beneficial infiltration as we would get out of a traditional development based on the stream length alone. I mean, that's not even considering the full spectrum detention. And then finally, we really went down again, and see, I told you I had this, I say 5 to 20. So I think I just mixed and matched some slides from an old presentation. But what we did when we went to the C scale, and this shows you the dendritic, is we really drilled down to backyard swale level kind of analysis. And it was good, but at the same time, going in the level of effort to break up basins to the scale requires a lot of work. And when I would run my continuous simulation model on this, which had, I think, about 63 years of rainfall, I'd push the button at the end of the day and come back and hope it was done in the morning. So, and I don't know, we don't normally do continuous simulation for design, but I feel like doing that is part of the way that we can sell green infrastructure, because when you think about the hydrologic cycle, I like to tell people that evapotranspiration is the 800-pound gorilla sitting in the corner that nobody talks about. It is the biggest part of the hydrologic cycle, yet most designs never even evaluate it. And if you do a green infrastructure system, there are a lot of benefits. We also got in at this level, we're really looking at, in the lower left, you can see how we represent those 4 cover types at the lot level. And this analysis scales. You could do this at a 1-acre site. You could do this for a 10-acre development site. What we were really trying to figure out is how can we do this at a watershed scale, come up with a comprehensive plan. And then as the watershed develops, you can go and analyze it on much smaller scales, but at least you have a comprehensive plan for the whole watershed. So continuing on, we came back basically to this B scale for model analysis. And again, I'll tell you it's 10 to 40 instead of 20 to 60 in our final report. And again, that is kind of a nice balance. We still, at this scale, we may not be explicitly representing all of the on-site LID practices, but if we're smart in the way we set up our swim subbasins, like I showed you before, there are ways that we can do it by measuring, typical plot plans for lots, where are the downspouts going? That can be accounted for at this scale. And we also, it gave us some good ideas and really led us down the path of realizing that if you're just doing one catchment and you're just connecting impervious area, that it's assuming that all of the pervious areas receiving pervious area. And you have to be careful about that because that will overstate the effects of green infrastructure. And I think that's something that none of us want to do, right? It's hard enough to sell it as it is. And if we overstate it and then the project doesn't live up to it, then people just abandon it. So I think it's really important to be realistic about how we're modeling that. And it requires a little more attention to detail and a little more time, but the results are worth it. So these are some of our results. And again, keep in mind, we kind of went all out on this. This was really, but I'll get to that in a minute. But so for our 2-year hydrographs, if you look at existing, you can't really see a tiny little blip in that blue and the green line, like way down at the bottom here. That's our proposed and existing. The black line is our hydrograph for proposed without our detention system. So this is a dendritic approach for a 2-year event. And it basically reduces the runoff to next to nothing, which is what we would expect in a 2-year event from prairie land, right? It's kind of an average annual event. Natural vegetation is adapted to our natural hydrology, so it's in balance with it. And you would not expect much runoff to happen from a 2-year event on healthy prairie. We also did the 100-year event, and you can see this is the undetained hydrograph. This is the existing condition hydrograph. And when we go all out with LID, we can make this even better. Now, keep in mind, this was not pristine prairie land when we started with it. It's rangeland. It's been grazed. So it does produce some runoff. It's just that by enhancing these drainage ways and building detention to slow down the runoff, we're able to do even better than the rangeland condition, which would be a big improvement for the watershed. Now, this is kind of my favorite part of it, which is continuous simulation. I like looking at things over a long period of time. And I think that this is helpful for being able to see a water balance. And these are just peak flow rates. And I only picked out 10 years from my model. This is 2000 through about 2010. And this is a traditional development, with the detention pond at the bottom of 130 acres. This is what would be coming out of that detention pond though. And you can see, and again, keep in mind, it's a decent sized watershed, but the biggest flow that would have happened would have been sometime in 2004, would have been, between 250 and 300 cubic feet per second. That's a big flow. And then look, year to year though, it's pretty frequent runoff, right? I mean, rainfall produces runoff. That's what we're seeing here. Now, what I really want to call your attention to is keep your eye on this scale. The upper limit of this scale is 300 cubic feet per second. Okay, this is the B scale with distributed full spectrum detention and accounting for permeable conveyances. Look at how the scale has changed. 20. It's an order of magnitude lower. We still have a pretty darn big event in 2004. I mean, that must have been a heck of a storm, but when you consider that it's, 10 times lower than what it would have been for a traditional development, that's really compelling. Now, the part to me that's more exciting than anything is when we count the number of runoff events, right? Because most people understand that BMPs reduce peak runoff. Some people understand that it reduces the volume of runoff, but most people don't understand that it reduces the frequency of runoff. And when we think about stream health and stream geomorphology, the frequency of the runoff is extremely important. I mean, a stream that experiences runoff 20 times a year is going to have potential for a lot more erosion than a stream that naturally experiences runoff 2 or 3 times per year. And when I personally have analyzed developing water or undeveloped watersheds in the Denver area, and I've analyzed a few of them, what's really typical for how runoff happens for undeveloped watersheds in Denver is it's usually not one rainfall event. It's usually 3 days of rainfall or 2 days. And you get enough rainfall on the first day or the first 2 days to really saturate the ground. And then you get a high intensity period after antecedent rainfall, and that will produce runoff. Whereas when you have a parking lot or impervious surface, the first event produces the runoff. So that kind of helps to explain it. It might take 3 or 4 days of rainfall to produce runoff in the natural condition or in our dendritic model, but each one of those days is going to produce runoff when we analyze it as impervious area. Good, I think I'm on track then. I think we're just about perfect. Thank you. Okay, so one thing I wanted to let you all know is that thanks to a lot of support from the Mile High Flood District and support from the Sustainable Stormwater Infrastructure Committee of the American Society of Civil Engineers, we have a report coming out from ASC at the end of July. We're really excited. I've already reviewed the proof copy. I think it's to the point where I'm expecting to get a laid out proof that we can just check off and move on. But this will be available in their online library in late July. And what this report really does is it lays out how we did all this modeling and what lessons we learned. I mean, it's a sizable report, but for technical people who are really interested in learning how to model green infrastructure, especially in our area here in Colorado in the West, I think this is going to be really useful. So I want to talk real quickly in the last few minutes we have left about modeling construction. And so far I've called this SPRUWP. This is actually, you obviously a lot of times development gets named by their street name or location or stream name when you start, but some developer comes in and makes up a fancy name. Well, this development is called Tamterra. Don't ask me what that means. It means place you want to buy homes. But we really did come up with a design that, is right in that sweet spot, about 4 miles of streams with about 3 miles of stormwater runoff. And, this was done in conjunction with the owner of the land, the developer. Their PCS group was involved. I think Westwood was the civil engineer. They worked with us in Muller Engineering to take the concepts that we had modeled and turn them into a real plan that could be developed. The one thing I'll tell you that was important about making this work is that this layout that you see here, the dendritic layout, did not cost them any lots relative to a traditional layout because we started early. Before we were impacting the streams and planned around them, we were able to achieve essentially the same density. And I've heard people say, and I've even said it before, that, oh, if you lose a few lots, you'll get better lot previews. Developers just don't buy that. I mean, I think it's true, but I just don't see the developers drinking that Kool-Aid. So I think we have to figure out a way to do it without decreasing the density in a meaningful way if we want to make this work. And the folks at Muller Engineering, Tim Williman and Sarah Johnson, really deserve a lot of credit. I was more involved in the modeling up front. They were much more involved in working with these people to actually get this plan implemented. And so there were some cost savings, extending the stream network, reduce the storm sewer costs. We have to have less infrastructure in streams if we reduce peak flow rates. I mean, think about crossings or pedestrian bridges or other things. the preserving streams, in the headwaters, especially those low order streams. Preserving those is a lot more cost effective than having to restore them. And in some cases, it's still beneficial to restore them. It's just going to cost you more. And then also if you can work with the site topography to reduce your earthwork. I mean, the days of mass grading sites should be gone. I know sometimes it has to be done, but you really, when you can work with the slope of the land, you number one, minimize the disturbance, you minimize compaction on the site, which is a big deal for green infrastructure. So really working with topography is a good one. And you can see at Tantera, this is Jim, by the way, for those of you who don't know him, a really great engineer who I've known for my whole career. And this is just showing you how they were preserving natural areas. You know, they kept the construction crews out of these beautiful natural corridors down there. Some of the lessons learned, it was very important to work with the developer and both the developer and the town to achieve their buy-in. You know, the town of Parker was a real supporter of this project. They were on board every way. They were not you know, objecting to trying something new. I mean, some local governments are so set in their ways that as soon as you come and say, hey, why don't we try this? It's not exactly how it's written in your criteria, it'll be better. They're like, no way, we were following our criteria to the letter of the law. And, you know, we have to be open to new ideas, and Parker was wonderful for that. And the developer was really on board. You have to balance competing priorities, you know, water. And as much as we wish that drainage and water were the only thing we had to worry about in design, it's not. We have to worry about roads, utilities, parks, densities of land use, all the while trying to preserve the street network. You know, a solid partnership really comes from being open to collaboration, a lot of listening, a lot of explaining, and being transparent about what we're trying to do. You know, and so that no one feels like they're hiding the ball from them or trying to make the developer do something they want to do, or the developer's trying to make the town do that. If you really approach this as a partnership with the town, the developer, the engineers, the landscape architects, and the rest of the design team, it's going to be a lot more successful. And then of course, communication is critical throughout the whole thing. So I'm gonna close out here with just 3 slides. They're pictures that Jim went out there and took earlier this spring. We gave a similar presentation like this to about 500 people at the Mile High Flood District Annual Conference this year. And it's just a beautiful corridor. These are some areas along the stream. You got a beautiful shot with some morning dew on undisturbed vegetation. And sunrise photo over Oak Gulch. So anyway, we think this is a real nice project. It's wonderful to actually see something, you know, over the course of 8 years go from initial ideas through real detailed vetting, through planning, through design, and now through construction. And the good news is that we're going to continue monitoring this. You know, we've been collecting some monitoring data. There's a professor at CU Boulder named Dr. Aditi Bhaskar. She used to be at CSU, and Aditi and her students are down there helping to monitor this. And so we're planning 2 more publications. One of them is going to be on the economics of the development. How do you economically make this work? And Jim and his folks at Muller are going to take the lead on that. We're going to try to publish that through ASCE too. And then probably, who knows, maybe another 5-10 years down the road, we'll finally be able to publish one on the monitoring data when we actually have enough monitoring data to say something meaningful about it. But obviously you can see that there are a lot of people involved with this. I was only a small part of this project. I'm very lucky to have been a part of this project, and lucky that I get to be the person talking about it sometimes. So thank you all so much for your time.
Let's take a couple minutes for questions. Anyone with questions? Stacy?
Did the developer
You know, I don't know, Jim would know the answer to that question, but I think the point with that is that they are real. I mean, I think you can sell a house for more that backs up to a beautiful open space than not. And I think that occurs really at the point of the transaction or when they're pricing it. It's just that when a developer's going in before they have buyers and when they're just looking at the layout, I don't know. I mean, I think it's real, but I just, in my experience, they tend to kind of poo-poo that. Like, oh yeah, whatever, you know, it's kind of like icing on the cake if they get it, but they're not going to give up 2 or 3 lots just because they believe they can sell 3 or 4 others at a higher rate. They're going to try and get them all and sell at a higher rate. So I think that is really the key. You have to get involved very early if you want to be able to achieve a similar density. And especially in urban places like Denver, you need density in some places. You really do. And if you can manage it in a smart way where you're still preserving green corridors where possible, that's a really good thing. The other thing I would add is that I know that this is, an undeveloped watershed, right, that we developed. Denver's a lot different, but the lessons are still the same, right? It's all about treating water near the source. That's what the planters on the street do, right? It's about trying to slow water down to make it take a longer path to where it's going to. If it has to go through a channel, make it vegetated instead of concrete. Use, swales instead of pipes when you can. Even if they might have walls and rails along them, you're still going to get some benefits from those things. So I think you can apply a lot of these same lessons in an urban context too. It's just a little different. And the CSU, I don't know how many of you all have been to the CSU SPUR campus, the backyard of the Hydro building there is a really good example of how this can be applied in urban setting. And we were actually lucky enough to help them with their water harvesting system, which was cool. That's
One of the
talk
biggest
for-
points is she brought up was master planning, because if you look at those colors, it could be a different developer, it could be a different
Yeah.
builder. So if you have a plan, it brings everything together. Now, to me, those are detention ponds that are online detention ponds. The hardest thing is to getting the stormwater from an individual subdivision and getting it into the channel that looks natural
Yes.
and not this big mound of riprap
Yeah.
or whatever. That's one of the hardest things in the world. And it's where stream design,
Yeah.
geomorphology and engineering, site engineering come together.
Yeah.
That's takes a lot of time and effort. And that's when you need a landscape architect that comes in and says, okay, we can do this, we can do that. So, but yeah, master plan is absolutely way to go.
I would also say if you're working on watersheds and streams, having a geomorphologist is a really good thing. I mean, because not all streams are the same. Some streams, the South Platte River acts geomorphically very, very different than a stream that hasn't been developed for 100 years. Go to the San Juan River, for example, or something similar sizes, probably similar flows, but very, very different in terms of how sensitive those streams are to different types of geomorphic effects. But there are a lot of good geomorphologists out there these days, and I know Mile High has really embraced having to get all these different disciplines, landscape architects, geomorphologists, you name it. I mean, you really need all of them to be successful. And for many years, engineers, including myself, I mean, I didn't learn geomorphology in school. I learned it while I've been working.
And the other hardest thing is you grade this thing. And you've got to work the grading into the natural stream, and you've got developed flows going into the stream. And it may change the velocities in the natural channel. You end up with a drop structure and you're analyzing it again. So there's a lot to go into it in order to make it all happen.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I love the tip, befriend your local geomorphologist. So anyone else with any other questions? I did just have one quick one, Andrew, which is just you talked about how fortunate you were that Parker was willing to collaborate on this project. So when the scale A versus scale B, like if there's a new development on the Front Range, would that still majority of them be taking that scale A approach, or more people starting to take that scale B approach when it comes to new developments? I mean, maybe particularly on the Front Range.
I think it depends on what stage of the planning you're in.
Okay.
Because normally, if you're doing master planning, even to this day, I've been involved in a couple master plans where we scaled it down, but that's still something that even for the Mile High Flood District, they're getting used to. Most watershed plans, I think, are still done at that 100 to 130 acre scale. But when you start to get into a development master plan, not a watershed master plan, but a development master plan where you're talking about a square mile like the Aurora Highlands or something, right? That's where you can start to get to this, because you are analyzing it then at a filing basis, like 10 to 40 acres or maybe bigger. And then ultimately, you even, with the detailed civil designs, you get down to lot scale. I mean, you're grading backyard swales and things. And I don't think you have to necessarily do a detailed hydraulic model at that scale or H&H model, but I do think at that 10 to 60 acre scale, if we can get a lot of these, not necessarily the master planning engineers that do the work for the flood district, but the design engineers that are hired by developers to develop the civils and the issue for construction drawings, that's the audience we have to get to, because they are analyzing it at that scale. It's just that most of them are only using rational
I
methods.
see. Okay. Yeah.
Related to development scale planning, have you been a part of or heard of any conversations where developers are considering building scale water supply mitigation measures like on-site non-potable reuse to then pair with more watershed scale GSI?
You know, I've not seen that integrated as much as it should be. I mean, I know there are places in the metro area that recycle a lot of water, some more so than others. But I really do think at the end of the day, you kind of have to consider total water management, right? It's all water. And I think that those are things that can play into it. You know, unfortunately, where we still are in Colorado with water rights, it's very difficult to harvest stormwater. I think there's hope for that, though. I mean, I think there could be ways you could do some maybe regional augmentation plans, so you could figure out a way to basically offset the water and allow a whole area to develop. And, you know, when they were considering the stormwater legislation that allows us to still build detention ponds and hold water, I did a study for Mile High Flood District that was hydrologic modeling. And one of the things you have to consider, and the point we made is that if you have undeveloped ground, right? And it's not a detention pond, it's just undeveloped ground and rainfall falls on it, what's gonna happen, okay? Some of it's gonna infiltrate, but anywhere from, you know, quarter to maybe 4/10 of an inch is going to be caught in depression storage or intercepted by the vegetation. And it's going to be re-evaporated or evapotranspired into the atmosphere, right? Well, okay, then we take that same land, just keep in mind, that's, you know, 0.35, 0.4 inches, right? We replace that with a stormwater pond and that holds water for 72 hours. You couldn't get 0.35 inches of evaporation off of that thing in 72 hours. So, you know, that was kind of an argument that you're going to have losses anyway. And if we're actually harvesting those losses, it shouldn't be water that the downstream users are using because it never gets to them. It's held up in depression storage and interception and then re-evapotranspired.
Great, Lee.
Does climate change or like predictions for the effects of climate change play a role in all this modeling?
I think it absolutely does. And I actually have done some work on climate change in the Denver metro area. And we published a white paper, I think it might have been back in 2015 or 2016, called Climate Change Effects on the Urban Drainage System. And we tried to kind of look into the crystal ball and see what would happen. And I've stayed up on the climate projections. And at least for the Front Range of Colorado, I don't think there's a huge trend that we're going to be wetter or drier, but we're going to be both, right? It's like the central tendency is not changing, but the amplitude of the variations are changing. So we're going to have deeper droughts. We're going to have wetter periods of wet weather. And I really do think that this green infrastructure is a huge part of the solution to that because, you know, you need to store water and soil moisture and shallow groundwater for times when you have droughts. If you're, you know, storing it in the soil instead of, you know, running it up down to Nebraska as fast as you can, you know, you actually are going to be able to use that water. There'll be a resource for plants. I think to Stacy's point, that also really plays into plant selection. And, you know, if you're going to have a facility that's going to be there for 20 years, you ought to be thinking about what temperature might look like in 20 years. I mean, you know, it's not that we can't do it, but we just might need to look at a plant palette from Santa Fe or Albuquerque, right? And you know, and at least have that in the mix. I think the other thing about kind of vegetation, and I'm not a vegetation expert, I'll qualify that, is that I think in our seed mixes that we're using for green infrastructure, we need to have seeds that can express themselves when it's drought or wet conditions, right? And there are different types of plants that if you can create a seed bank for your green infrastructure area that has a variety of plants in it, it may look different from year to year, depending on whether it's a wet year or dry year, but you're going to have some types of vegetation in there that are going to be able to grow in just about any year. So those are my thoughts. But yeah, absolutely climate change. And to me, green infrastructure is a great hedge against climate change. I mean, it's good for cooling temperature island effects and all of those things. And it's just if we can retain more water, it's going to be good for our watersheds.
Great. Well, perfect timing. That's your cue. Yeah. Oh, yes. There you go. That's all right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Earl. Great.
Be right back there.
No worries.
I'm gonna pull my card one. I think that qualifies, doesn't it?
Well, we have Carl from City and County of Denver. While I pull up Carl's presentation, I do see we had two people walk in, so I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. Don't mind saying your name, who you're with, and then our icebreaker question, which you missed, was if you were to host a podcast, what would that podcast be about? Yeah, so I'm throwing it to you first, Matt. So you think on the spot.
Hey everyone, I've been most people here, Matt Ashley with Aurora Water. I manage our watershed health program. And podcasts would be, I don't know, about like river stuff like kayaking and rafting probably.
Hi, I'm Sarah Robinson. I'm with the US Water Alliance. Oh my gosh, I don't know what my podcast would be about. I love cooking, so maybe just healthy cooking recipes, making food more accessible to people. Probably something along those lines.
Perfect. Thanks, Sarah. All right, Carl, do you want to come up here? I got your presentation all queued up and you should be ready to go.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Stacy and Dr. Andrew for their presentations. I think I did a lot, hopefully everyone else did as well. But for everyone that wasn't here when we did our introductions, I'm Carl Burkhart, Senior Landscape Architect with the City and County's Division of Green Infrastructure. And today I'm just going to talk to you about the evolution of green streets, particularly a new, or I guess it's not new anymore, but one of the newest documents that we have here in Denver, one of our guiding principles is the Denver Green Continuum. Yeah, so we'll just kick off with the an introduction, kind of the history of DGI, evolution of green streets and the green continuum, and using the green continuum as a tool, and kind of lessons learned. So, brief history. Here in Denver, we currently have about 25.8 miles of green streets currently built, which contributes to about 2,426 trees planted, a little over 10,000 acres treated, and about a little more than 4.5 acres of impervious removed. So existing impervious that our projects have come through, taken out, replaced with green infrastructure. That's over about 58 different construction projects. And then a total of about 64, so we have a bunch that are currently in design. Here we got some pictures of some of our showcase projects, all different scales, different types. Generally, they're basically two types of projects: regional and street side. So we've got 39th Avenue Greenway, which is kind of a semi. It has a regional component to it, but the DGI planters are street side. We've got a bump out project at 28th and Marion. We've also got a regional project at 38th and Holly with a water quality outfall system that goes into a detention pond, and then Brighton Boulevard, which we've seen a few examples of already today. So maybe what Stacey talked about, but what is green infrastructure? The definition in Denver is a little bit different than some people might have, and there's not really a shared definition between everyone in the world. But here in Denver, because we're funded by the city's stormwater tax, to us, it's living infrastructure that uses soil processes, particularly to manage stormwater and create a healthier environment. Again, it ranges in scale from just a single tree at site scale to regional approaches with constructed wetlands and protection of floodplains and our interconnected greenways. We're getting kind of like the evolution of green infrastructure, so kind of where we started to where we are now, and then we'll also move into the future of GI. So our early planning work was really focused on the green infrastructure implementation strategy. This was set up in 2015, which really took a basin-wide approach across the city, looking at various elements of the drainage patterns in the urban Denver. It identified a lot of key projects. So this is where projects like City Park Golf Course Detention Pond came out of that. Brighton Boulevard came out of it. So kind of focusing on just the regional and the larger street side projects that were in conjunction with kind of larger streetscape redevelopments. Really soon after that, actually the same year, we developed the ultra urban green infrastructure guidelines. So this is our kind of our guidelines that tell designers and engineers the regulation, the requirements for planters, and also examples of details getting into how we might build different situations for green infrastructure. Ultra urban really focuses on the street side planters with really, we call them now LOGs, or levels of green. So that really stuck to the level of green 5. So you're just seeing deeper walls, about a 1 foot of freeboard. So yeah, just kind of our heavy duty, we call them the Cadillac of green infrastructure in Denver. So the 2015 implementation strategy, again, focused on basin level analysis, and best opportunities for GI within both public right of way and all city owned assets. So our focus primarily is, we can't really look at development, private development or existing development patterns. We're really focused on the areas that the city of Denver owns. So things like city owned parcels, public parks, and also our green streets. So basically anything back a curb or bump outs, something that can go into the right of way or as part of that area that's kind of brings up some issues, but the area that's maintained by property owners, but is technically city owned right of way. Also, the ultra urban guidelines, provides the design guidelines for street side GI in this highly urbanized settings. You see here some details from the ultra urban guidelines document and a graphic here that really shows like every planter kind of had to have the same set of elements. Some elements include, a curb, wall, or a railing for pedestrian protection. Parking step outs because we're dealing with ultra urban conditions. Usually there's parking. If there's not parking, we even do a splash zone, just separating cars from the GI. Inlets with wheel protection, sediment control forebays, which typically are, concrete pads. So everything's kind of really highly engineered, a lot of concrete involved. Overflow structures with the slotted under drain, the mile high flow districts specification for bioretention media, and then the top layer of vegetation. Just kind of going to the history of this, it was just even a challenge to get trees in the ultra urban at one point. We talked about earlier today, the different agencies within Denver not really talking to one another, people from transportation, other, parks, other people just didn't really have, they didn't believe that trees could survive in the type of water that green infrastructure takes on or the soils that we're putting them in. But we fought for it. We got trees. Now I think every GI planter, or almost every planter, has at least a tree in it, which has a ton of benefits. The shade, fighting climate change, and early dying. But this kind of brings us to a dilemma. We call it the hammer and nail dilemma. We would go through the master planning process, identify the projects where GI would work. We would then take that project, put it through feasibility and analysis to see if it's feasible to implement water quality capture volume within green infrastructure. Then we come to a decision point. Yes, is it feasible? No, is it not feasible? If yes, green infrastructure was required, the city would, we would pursue it. No, no requirements, no guidance. We would really just say, sorry, next project, next time. Part of that again is because of the over-engineered, I like to call, approach to GI. You can see in this, this is what they pretty much all look like. You have 3 foot deep walls, walls down frost. A lot of media depth, which is great for, taking on more water. We typically find in the city, we don't get a lot of infiltration just because of our urban soils. Also clay soils, so even if there hasn't been a lot of compaction, the clay soils make it a challenge. And because we're in the city, mostly in developed areas, we typically have a storm drain nearby, so it's easy enough just to tie into it. But again, all these things add cost and add complexity. So we kind of realized that this tool, while a great tool, was not useful for every project. So green infrastructure had to evolve. We evolved beyond the focus of just water quality and expanded into the extent and rate of implementation of green infrastructure. So kind of expanding our definition of what green infrastructure might look at, kind of keeping in the back of our mind that it has to be in the name of water quality improvement. So we knew we were going to mitigate and adapt to our increasingly changing climate. We needed to have a versatile and practical set of tools. And the really big focus was on providing additional co-benefits. So not just stormwater, but can we give a little bit more weight to trees and shade. And then we also wanted to remain adaptable so that not only DGI and the city, Dottie, would be able to apply these principles, but also private and kind of quasi-public development, which is what you see in some of the examples at DHA Sun Valley, where they're kind of using these as a guidance, using mile high flood districts guidance, but building, constructing them themselves and maintaining them themselves. So together, green infrastructure implementation strategy and the ultra urban guidelines Right, so baseline of strategic planning and design guidance for all our projects across Denver. However, the documents just leave a lot of opportunities off the table and present interesting challenges to meeting all of our broad goals and objectives. In this picture here, Brighton Boulevard street side planters, so kind of our larger Cadillac style level of green 5 planters. That moves us into the current era of green infrastructure and the green continuum, where we want to adapt, expand, and optimize our approach to green infrastructure. The photo here is from the Connecting Your Area flow-through planters at the Connecting Your Area Shared Street downtown. So this is connecting Larimer Square to Auraria campus. So not only did it bring in, a lot of benefits, including multimodal connections with a bike lane, a pedestrian kind of shared street space, but we get these planters here, which you can see aren't nearly as deep. They're still concrete walls, but they aren't nearly as deep. And they're flow-through planters, so because it was on a bridge or connected to the bridge, there wasn't a great opportunity to tie in stormwater. So if water flows in, infiltrates a little bit, and then any excess will flow out. And getting into kind of changing those priorities, we still keep the priority of stormwater with minimizing the impervious cover, reducing peak flow, and improving water quality through green processes. But we're also, adding kind of an equal weight and focus to urban heat and tree canopy, not only preserving existing trees, which was really hard to do with the level of green 5s when you're changing the grade about 2 feet, but also providing adequate soil volumes. Again, all that work, we have requirements only 40 feet long, so that pedestrians have places to walk through. When we're building walls, it gets really, really challenging to provide adequate amount of soil for a tree. So we give ourselves some other options at different depths, different widths, and just kind of easier, maybe relying more on native soils as well. And tree selection, diversity, and optimal placement. And then the co-benefits really focus on equitable outcomes. So instead of having these really challenging projects that are hard to kind of shoehorn everywhere, it just gives us a much wider breadth, a lot more tools to go into different neighborhoods in the city to apply GI in neighborhoods that traditionally hadn't been invested in, maybe not having the stormwater infrastructure that other neighborhoods have. So we'll kind of get into just a quick rundown of the benefits of the levels of green. Our street side planters, which is mainly where the focus is on, are either designed to capture water quality or maximize water quality. So that's our higher levels of green, the 5, the 4, or really just provide tree canopy and high quality landscaping. So it's the lower levels of green 1 to 2, and then level of green 3, which you saw in the photo of Auraria. That's kind of the balance point. And in the graph here, you can kind of see, the tree canopy cooling benefits, where the level of green 1 has kind of the highest cooling benefits because we can get the most trees in. And then it kind of goes down to level of green 5. Peak flow reductions, much higher for the level of green 5s, goes down as we go to level of green 1. And a variety of criteria, all that basically, we're and the idea of supporting plants and capturing stormwater, just at different levels. So one of the main goals we discussed earlier, optimizing for stormwater treatment. Here we can see results from EPA SWIM models, looking at a 2-year water quality capture volume design storm and 10 years of continuous simulation. You can see here in the gray down here. So this is our control. That's a non-GI facility. So basically a raised planter actually has negative water quality storm peak reduction. And then when you move into the other levels of green, so it's kind of hard to tell, but you've got the lightest green and then you kind of go up to the darkest greens here. Much better, peaking around 80, getting close to 100% water quality or stormwater reduction. So again, kind of mapping it out as a proof of concept, if you will, and then looking at the level of performance. So yeah, level green 1, peak flow reduction 5 to 10 or 5 to 15%, with the level green 5 over 80%, and then for the 10-year storm, 40 to 50% on the 5. So still doing a lot in a little amount of space with the 5s, but just giving us a broader range to try and piece together different levels of green within a project. The other thing we're really focusing on is optimizing the tree canopy and, for just canopy diversity and heat mitigation. You can see here from recent Landsat modeling, that work that we've done, just the right of way canopy coverage versus the land surface temperature. What we learned from this is that, 2 degree Fahrenheit decrease in land surface temperature for about every 10% increase in canopy coverage. The big takeaway here is that increasing canopy coverage on streets with the lowest canopy, so basically no trees, 0 to 10%, sees immediately the greatest impact and the greatest reductions of the land surface temperature. We've also learned from this study that street orientation really matters. That the north to south oriented streets are typically a half-degree hotter on average than east to west oriented streets. So that kind of just infers, where we might want to focus a little bit more on trees in the lower levels versus the higher levels. Along with that, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but optimizing soil volume. A lot of research recently is showing that the adequate soil volume to really support a mature tree, it's about 1,000 cubic feet of soil per tree. That's uncompacted soil, it's not just any soil. Again, in the city of Denver, we have a lot of urban infill, really, really tough conditions. We recently did a project where had our crews out there. We knew that it was going to be pretty tough. They, removing asphalt, putting in planters. They dug up the asphalt, they found bricks underneath. Dug up the bricks, found more asphalt underneath. Dug up that asphalt, found an old railroad underneath. So it's it can be challenging. So using native soils is pretty tricky. We do have it in our toolkit now, but we tend to excavate as much soil as we can and replace with good quality amended soils. Bioretention media if needed, and making sure that that media stays uncompacted from the trees. We show in here, I think right now that was like a 10x4, so that was the city's minimum standard. That's since changed to 5x15. So still not perfect, but that gives us about 150 the new standard, 120 to 150 cubic feet of soil, the city's minimum standard. Not quite cutting it when you're talking about supporting large mature trees to combat urban heat island. So really your planters have to get bigger, deeper, and more robust to be able to support trees in that heat. Some other strategies we're using, actually we're pursuing these on the Colfax BRT project currently. So pervious amenity zone, where Colfax is a pretty challenging area for plants. So we're going to be doing our GI with permeable pavers in the right of way in the amenity zone. So still giving us the soil volumes, uncompacted soils to support trees. Also kind of a beautification and urbanization of the area with a paver pattern. And then when we're not doing that, we're also pursuing structural soil cells. So still we got some at-grade planters. And then just get to that closer 1,000 cubic feet of soil per tree, extending beneath the sidewalk, kind of to the sides, connecting disconnected planters underground so that the soils are connected and trees can kind of share more uncompacted soil. And then optimizing for co-benefits. So it's a multi-headed approach with a balance of equity that you can kind of see here. I had to PDF this, so as I wanted to, but equity areas, so the lower equity areas in red, with the higher equity areas in green. Here it is referred to as the inverted L in Denver. That layered on top with water quality. So more impacted, lower water quality scores in the red and higher in green. Also flood risk. We don't really rely on our green infrastructure to address flood risk. But when you're talking to the community, you're talking to business owners, to neighbors, it is an issue. It tends to be an issue, and it tends to help us sell green infrastructure because we know there is a volume that we can't capture. And then on top of that, heat. So here we're showing our modeling of the city's hottest streets, with red being the top 10% hottest streets, and green being in the 80th percentile. So you can, again, the inverted L in all of these kind of stands out in red as having the lowest equity scores, the worst water quality, and the most heat. So expanding that green infrastructure toolkit, Levels green 1 and 2 being less engineered, designed to reduce the impervious area by planting trees and vegetation. Level green 3 being cost effective, kind of balance of the control measures. Level green 4 and 5 intended to meet the regulatory requirements. So we feel like we're in a balance point now where we're now dilemma has sort of been solved. But we go through the master planning process, look at feasibility, make that deciding factor. Is water quality capture volume of level green 5 available? Yes or no? If yes, we'll require it. We move on from there. We're gonna do the project as normal with level green 5s. If no, then we start to look at other options. Are levels 1, 2, 3, or 4 feasible? If yes, then we've now unlocked more GI benefits across the city. And of course, some projects it doesn't fit. But we're learning that with the levels of green, especially with the 1s and 2s, we're finding GI benefits on almost every CIP project across the board. So what do they look like? We'll jump into level green 1. So again, this is our lowest level of green, which really focuses on reducing impervious surfaces. So again, the big benefit here is just taking pavement, removing it and replacing with high quality vegetation and providing a solid foundation of uncompacted soil and then planting media for the plants to grow in. They're super versatile, typically between parking zones and sidewalks, so the amenity zone, also in pedestrian areas such as pet malls, along streets, in front of cafes and shops, areas where you might have some foot traffic coming through. We're not creating trip hazards or really deep planters that sort of separate the streetscape from the pedestrian space. And it really works well with landscape renovations. Running it basically any project can fit it now what you want. And we've done it on South Broadway where we have a lot of dead trees. So replacing trees, coming in, amending the soil, even around existing trees, we can work with forestry, do air spading around existing tree roots, replace the soil and get in a larger planting area, program called Free to Tree. The next level of green 2, so we're purposely directing runoff from the impervious pedestrian areas, just sidewalks, and just slightly reduce pervious landscapes, that we can, catch some incidental infiltration. Again, it's typically sidewalks, so we're looking at 5, 8, up to maybe 12 feet wide of the space. Our planters tend to be about 40 feet long, so it's a relatively small area, but they start to add up across the project when you have multiple of these facilities. They also tend to be about 2 to 3 inches deep. So, there's a little bit of capture volume. They tend to not really hold water at all. Everything just kind of infiltrates into the soil. Again, also located between parking zones and sidewalks. Great for fitting in the residential, commercial, and industrial areas. And redevelopment projects where we need to reduce the urban heat island effect. And landscape renovations and amenity zones and tree lawns, again, where the dead and dying trees need to be replaced. This is pretty easy. The big change from levels of 1 is just dropping that soil depth slightly. And some examples of the level of green 2 here are 21st and Broadway. So this is a pedestrian and bike thoroughfare that used to be a roadway. Taking that area, turned it into a pedestrian plaza and a multimodal connection. So we have this level of green 2 that separates the pets and the bikes, just to kind of creating a green buffer between the two uses. And we have some on Brighton Boulevard, where really it's on Brighton, if you weren't really paying attention, you might not be able to tell the difference between the 5s and the 2s, because they have the same curves, but these are just, curved planters sitting about an inch lower with scuppers formed into the curves around them. And our level of green 3, so the next level up, building on performance characteristics of 1 and 2s, accepts runoff from the pedestrian and vehicular zones now. So you can see in the graphic that we've introduced the curb cut, we've introduced the wheel protection, it's not a step out area. So it's between those zones and also at end blocks. It's great for roadway rehabilitation projects where we're doing curb work. Also great for areas where we might not have an under drain or existing stormwater to connect to. So these are flow through planters like you see on the area. And we've got some examples here from Fort Collins which I think jumped on it and did it first before we did here in Denver. The next level 4 is when we start to detain, treat, and infiltrate the release of runoff from impermeable surfaces. This one is designed to not only capture water from the sidewalk in the street, but it's gonna hold it for a period of time, and it has a slight overflow. Kind of a spillway built into the street side curb. So again, can be a flow through, but it's designed to hold the capture volume. And this one is full infiltration. We actually haven't found, I don't think, a real LNG4 in Denver yet. You know, we're preserving it in our document. We've kind of used it in a way, like on Brighton Boulevard. We have a train of like 3 4s that go into a 5, so they can kind of work in succession and then spill into the 5. So in an emergency, then we have water just go straight into storm. But again, just a great tool to keep in the back of our pocket when we find the right condition, where we have maybe a sandier soil or somewhere we can treat. And again, with being the fact that we're doing a lot of curb work, they're great for retrofit rehab projects. And again, the Cadillac, the level green 5, so the engineered control measures that ultra urban guidelines contain. And they're intended to meet the regulatory requirements. And it's also between the parking zones and sidewalks and the amenity zones, good for residential, commercial, and industrial areas. And these are for projects where water quality capture volume is the primary driver. So larger areas, it used to be driven by MS4 permit. Now we kind of just put them in wherever we can, whenever we think the requirement will be, or where it's going to be most beneficial. Essentially, it's the same as the level of green 4, but you see here we've got an under drain and an overflow. So water can just bypass and go into the storm system in a larger rain event. So yeah, utilizing those tools in the green continuum, our planning and design teams can collaborate, analyze data, and engage stakeholders to more successfully implement more GI across the city. So getting into next steps, you know, we're looking to the future now. So really expanding our shared language within the city, making sure that all agencies kind of share the same institutionalized knowledge of GI, forming collaborations and partnerships with Mile High, with EPA, you, our firms, all of our partners, really, working together to make sure that we can expand GI. And we're currently updating our guidance. We also have a new program called Deep Pave Green in Denver, where we're trying to keep pace with the growing rate of pervious cover in Denver and combat urban heat. And another program we just kicked off is the SWIFT implementation of green infrastructure, where we're really looking at community identified sites and significantly reducing the timeline and the cost of GI. Shared language, kind of just went over this, but updating our documents, institutionalizing, and working with interagency partners. DPAVE, some interesting points here. In 2019, 49% of Denver was covered in impervious surfaces, and modeling work is projecting by 2040 will be about 61 to 67% impervious. So that's really the driver for DPAVE Greener Denver. We're kicking off this new strategic plan focused on reducing the impervious through landscape transformation based on our community-led site IDs and SWIFT implementation. So last year we started this new program where we're designing and installing levels of green, so 2 and 3 at scale with an accelerated timeline of under 9 months. Rolling is looking a little bit more like 1 year, but significantly shorter than some of the projects we've seen pictures of already that are like 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8 years from design to construction. And the big focus on this is we're going to the community, where community ambassadors are not only helping us identify sites, but supplementing the construction and maintenance. And some examples of that we'll share here. 14th Avenue, the West Colfax neighborhood. You can see it existing, just an underutilized tree lawn area, had thatch built up over years, so kind of mounted about 3 or 4 inches. Our Dottie wastewater crews came in and helped us with soil prep, removing the soil, making a depression to get the level of green 2. We had DGI volunteers, the GRIT program, Groundwork Denver came out to help us. We also had a green workforce program come out and help us plant trees and 1,400 understory plants. And then you can see the photo at the end in fall of last year, of what the completed project looked like. Fortunately, by that point, the trees have gone dormant. It's not dead, I promise. Another one we have in working partnership with Denver Water. was at the Chipsbury pump station. Again, kind of an underutilized tree lawn area. They were interested in converting the Kentucky bluegrass tree lawn to a more active or more performative landscape. So this when we worked with the contractor, and we did site prep in the fall. They did construction. It was like a matter of weeks that they had got the inlets in and the level being 3 swale in. And then spring of this year during a rain event after planting, where you can see it performing. 26 in Walnut, this is actually currently in construction, got one planter that actually is starting to look complete. But we've got a level green 2 and a level green 3, we're just waiting on inlets and there's some timing of lead times there. But you know, the before here paved sidewalk, this is one where they dug up the concrete, then asphalt, then brick, then more. So yeah, wastewater crews helping us with the removal of the impervious surfaces, amending the soils, or bringing new soils with amendments, planting with the wastewater ops and our internal maintenance crews. And then after this photo was taken last week, I believe, so completed planting with the tree and the story plants. Yeah, so the future of GI in Denver, it's really building on the past and present strategic plans. Our design guidance while evolving to focus more on our swift, flexible, and tactical implementation. So kind of going more less from the strategic, more to the tactical. And our current pilot programs, the collaborative partnerships. So the evolution of GI in Denver is now. And thank you all for your time.
We have time for maybe we'll just 1 or 2 questions for Carl before we we'll take a really quick break and then we'll get you all on your feet and walking around. So anyone with any questions for Carl on his presentation? Tomorrow.
Sometimes it's used with the planting the trees in the area rates.
I mean, we do, should have added some of our feasibility studies, but we do look at that map of the hottest streets. So it's maybe a little bit more high level now that we have our streets all mapped out. Most of what we're doing, we focus on the top 20%, ideally the top 10% hottest streets. So less microclimate, but when we find a corridor, we'll then look for projects and opportunities on that corridor. And then from there, it's really for the design teams, whether we do it in-house or whether we hire engineers, planners and landscape architects to kind of look at the site specific conditions. But yeah, typically when the landscape architects are on the project, they're looking at the specific microclimates. We are expanding our plant palette now because of that. When we're downtown, we find there are a lot of sites that sit in deep shade almost all day because they're on the north side of a really tall building. Typically, you know, we have a xeric planting plan or an adaptive planting plan, that, you know, plants that can handle drought and full sun. We don't really have a lot of plants in there that can handle shade most of the day. So we're kind of evolving into that also as we speak. It's another planting palette, but you know, adaptive to the microclimates.
Lindsay?
Presentation, it was really great to see what you all are up to and to just learn a little bit more about it. We do a lot of our work in Southwest Denver, so West Colfax, City Park, Verde, Franklin, West, we hire community connectors, so leaders that come from these neighborhoods, they're living in these neighborhoods, they have that community vision here. Really connects with their neighbors and just kind of those clients. And they also like attend all of the community meetings, all of the development proposals, and some of the things that they've noticed over time, like on this Colfax, for example, this green infrastructure will be like drafted in the beginning, and then it'll sort of get value engineered out at some point in time, and it'll just disappear sometime in between engagement and development. And so they feel a little discouraged that it's incumbent on them to pay attention to follow the evolution design plans and to advocate for it along the way. I've seen this in my neighborhood too. I live past meetings now. And I'm wondering if there's anything like we should tell them about future of green infrastructure and how it will be, implemented as a matter of course along, all the new leader construction is going to work, in different areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing to take back to them, is the SIGI program, the SWIFT implementation program. Currently we're working on 3 different projects, so we break it up by year. Right now, we're at 5 points. Next year, we're gonna be focusing on Westwood and this neighborhood here, La Alma Lincoln Park. And with that, we're doing exactly the same. We're, contracting with the community-based organizations, we have an outreach firm that's working with Promaturos. So they're finding those people in the neighborhood, and they're the ones that are leading the design. And because Siggy is more of that swift, rapid project, and it's just us, it's just DGI, so we're not like at the whim of transportation or wastewater. We're controlling the budget, we're kind of controlling the vision, we're letting the community tell us what they want. So I think that's kind of one of the reasons why we came up with Siggy, not only to get more projects in quicker, and cheaper, but also to put them where people really need them. And we
When
actually,
you talk about the Promaturos, are you talking about that Castleton did
yes,
program? Okay.
yeah,
It's the
so,
only organization that's still currently paying our Promaturos because the termination of that contract was last December.
yeah, so
Okay.
yeah, my counterpart in our planning team, Chauncey Bigler, she is, working to try and get that back, or at least DGI to follow that same model and start to pay them as well, because we do recognize that it's a lot of work. They spend a lot of time in the community and they're passionate about it, and we've seen it time and time again. And I personally worked for 3 years at Stantec on the South Federal Boulevard project, Green Boulevard, which that project got killed for various political reasons. So doing that and then managing the city and then seeing it die, it's just heartbreaking. And knowing the people the community that were there and working on that for nearly a decade just to see it go away. So we're trying to do right by the community and bring Siggy to that neighborhood very soon. Also with the Tennessee Avenue Greenway. So maybe we can't do the work on federal, but making connections to federal.
How long ago I hadn't heard that. I knew that it was. Kind of got killed by the lockdown and ready to go, and the cost skyrocketed, but I heard that it was coming soon. I'm waiting for it. So it's dead now.
We're getting BRT and we're getting trees with BRT, but we're not getting green infrastructure.
No, the federal side.
Yeah, federal BRT.
Oh, federal being, yeah, it's
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah, so federal BRT is happening, but there was a green infrastructure project from Mississippi to Alameda.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah. Yeah, so that project is essentially dead in the water.
I didn't know that. Shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a shame, but I mean, we're hopeful that BRT will still provide a lot of benefits, and with that project, we'll still get maybe probably levels of green of 1 and 2, but we're not gonna get the 90 some acres that we planned on.
Terrible.
Stacy, final question, and then we'll take into a break and then get us out and into the neighborhood here. But Stacy,
Now, and I don't know if it's still involved, but at one point you had worked with developers to do some of the maintenance of the green infrastructure on Brighton Boulevard. Is that still the case?
So with Brighton Boulevard and a lot of our projects, we tend to work with the business improvement districts. So less individual developers, more so with the district. So Brighton Boulevard is a great example where the Rhino did. We split the maintenance, all of our projects, because we're in that right of way space that's, owned by the city, but technically it's supposed to be maintained by the property owners. We can't expect every property owner to maintain our level 3 and 5 facilities to the standards that they need to be maintained. So in that case, the bids are great, we can train them on, basically they'll do plant maintenance, trash pickup, and then DGI, we have an internal maintenance staff of about 4 people now, 2 horticulturalists, a crew lead, and a program lead. And they will cover everything like cleaning out the under drains, making sure that the floorways are cleaned. They do the monitoring to make sure that we'll do periodic infiltration tests, just making sure that everything's performing. But the bids help out with kind of the stuff that you can see, the vegetation, trash cleanup, things like that. Colfax BRT is one where we've got 3 bids, that are all working on it, Auraria as well, and then we've got the Downtown Denver Partnership helping us out, and Auraria Campus. So we do love to do that, and I think we're working on, we would love to get into the development world as well. But right now, I think we're learning from the BID and the GID process.
Yeah, the beginning project for the, before Brighton Boulevard got put in, the first meeting was actually, Jason Winkler that was in an industry, and also Kyle and Nikki Zeppelin, from Taxi. Were there to talk about some things, cause they were talking about, you know, they weren't real thrilled that there was a big storm sewer pipe coming to their neighborhood, and that, there were like more opportunities for green infrastructure, so that they were very involved as developers that wanted to see the city do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, and I think, things are changing as well, we're currently looking at revamping our very, very outdated landscape codes. I think they're dated 1995 right now. So as that happens, and we're limiting the amount of bluegrass and Kentucky bluegrass tree lawns are gonna basically be non-existent in the right way anymore. So it's giving developers, incentive to do something else, or forcing them to have to do something else. And so I will see the opportunity to be able to work with developers to, possibly bring more opportunities for GI in, sharing that. I think that's the big sell if you work with a developer or if it's a significant district is, yeah, there's gonna be this landscape element that's a little bit more complicated, but we can help with maintaining it. We'll take that off your hands, we'll keep the trees alive for you, which is pretty attractive to the development.
Well, let's thank all three of our presenters again for their presentations. I did have some full panel discussions, but I think we'll just integrate that into the walking tour here. So if everyone wants to take, let's just say 8 minutes. So let's reconvene at 3:25, grab a snack, use the restroom, move your car, whatever you need to do. We'll reconvene at 3:25, and then Stacy and Jim will take us out to look at some green infrastructure in action, and we might get it actually in action with a little rain. So with that, we'll see you all at 3:25. Thanks for the great presentation.